to this, or as Kendrick Lamar says, there's levels to this. Be humble.
Be humble.
I don't know.
They ended the balance one.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so welcome everybody. We're live, and we don't know if everything's working on your end, you the listener, but welcome obviously to my channel, Theory Pleeb, where this is beginning. This might also be cross-posted, reposted, edited, and then added to Que Vuoi or your guys' personal channels. But I'll go ahead and, by way of introduction, Andrew is right there on my, is it my right, your left audience, and above Andrew is Nick. And so Andrew's been on the channel a couple of times before. He is in the Navy. He wants to be a clinician. He's been studying Lacan. And so I hooked him up with Nick, and they've been studying Lacan together because Nick had a big interest in just actually, like, for Nick, it's funny when we bring up, we will inevitably bring up the fact that some people's libidinal economy is such that they get enjoyment from trying to crack something that's difficult. And so, like, there's like this level to Lacan where it's like it's worth doing if you like that, and then that's a completely separate question from is Lacan useful for other reasons. And so because we could lie to ourselves or post hoc rationalize why we like Lacan, but if in reality we like the challenge of a difficult, seemingly obscurantist kind of thinker who people are all like, oh my God, what is this person about? Is it a waste of time or not? And we just get like a sense of jouissance from reading that person because it's not pleasurable. You want to throw the book across the room. You want to throw it out the window. You want to, you want to say, fuck you. I'm not interested in this. I don't think it's worth my time. But that you get this enjoyment from it. And you're like, yeah. And I know that this is Nick's personality, or the organization of his subjectivity, because he also you did your thesis? Was this your master's thesis on Joyce and Ulysses in particular? Is that right?
I wrote my master's thesis on, like certain resonance between Joyce and, sorry, that's my background right there.
Yeah, I see that. That's hilarious.
My intellect coming through.
No, it's cool. So your painting fell off. No worries. Yeah. So
comic, by the way, from Matt Groening before he was famous for The Simpsons.
Oh, the painting that's
Life in Hell, and I definitely recommend y'all look this up. Life in Hell by Matt Groening.
So sorry. Just for the people who are listening to this conversation on the podcast in the future, what you're talking about is the painting behind you that just fell down, and it's called Life in Hell, and you're saying people should look it up. Is that right?
You should look this up. Yes, this was just a parenthetical statement.
Gotcha.
Look up Life in Hell, Matt Groening, before he started The Simpsons.
Dope. And so you did. So you obviously like the struggle.
Right. The master's thesis was on connections between Joyce and Dante. Specifically Dante's Inferno, but also how James Joyce basically, through his professional life as an author, but also as an author modeling his life upon his work, and vice versa, basically took inspiration from Dante and was self-exiled. So one of the themes that interests me the most as an aspiring theoretician is this idea of exile. And it actually set me down the path of discovering theory through, researching Ulysses and Joyce, and like having a kind of, let's say, obsessional, neurotic fixation on Joyce. Through studying his work, I went down the path of theory, and found out what like jouissance was.
So
I had
did
never
you?
heard that term. My first encounter with it was with like Kristeva, for example. I found that just by chance through researching Joyce. That's what set me down the Lacan path. That's how I encountered you, Dave, and like your whole channel, and you know your whole series with Mike.
So you discovered? Are you saying you came to theory through? You came to my stuff through Michael's stuff. Is that what you're saying? So you came to it through the Dangerous Maybe blog. Is that right?
No, I discovered Lacan through Lit.
Through
Basically,
Kristeva.
during
Through
the time.
Kristeva.
Through Kristeva initially, and then I think it might have been just the algorithm, just googling Lacan, like the series you did with Mikey. I encountered just randomly. I think this is like November 2020, and it just set me down this path of becoming fascinated with Lacan.
Nice.
Love it. Yeah. And what about you, Andrew?
Well, first of all, Kristeva is definitely OG. She's definitely bae. But from me, it was actually from a series of like different like algorithms and content creators. But I've actually content creators. But I found your channel from looking up Richard Wolff.
Oh, back in the day.
And, yeah, back in the day when you did the whole thing with Richard Wolff.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, like I found out about Lacan from Žižek, but I didn't get into Lacan specifically from reading Žižek. I had read was reading through Sublime Object Ideology, but like in my library at the time, I had D&G without realizing it. You know, I stumbled upon Anti-Oedipus from a Barnes & Noble's. I bought it like right before deployment. Never picked it up. It just had like a cool like description like, oh, Freud and Marx, and I was like, oh, this is pretty like, you know, transgressive or whatever. And then like when I found out like, oh, they were like post-structuralists or postmodernists according to Stephen Hicks, and I saw that name, and I was like, oh shit, I think I recognized the name. And then I looked at my library, I was like, oh, I have their book. So I picked it up and I saw all the Lacan references, and that's like pretty much what got me into Lacan, was reading Anti-Oedipus mixed with Žižek as well, and his references to Lacan and symptom and desire. But then that also led me toward actually getting into your channel because of my whole YouTube algorithm at the time. I was in the middle of transitioning from San Diego to Virginia, and then I was at a hotel and I woke up one morning and I saw like a recommended, and it was the first episode with you and Mikey on Lacan. I think it was the 3 registers, right?
No fucking way. The first episode?
Like, yeah. And
you were there for the first Wait. So wait, when it was live?
No.
Oh.
It was like, yeah, it was like probably like maybe like a month or 2 after it was aired. But it was recommended on like, because I had like, I guess, followed your channel after the the thing with you and Richard Wolff. So it was that initial episode of the Lacan one that put me on a spiral to your channel. So I was like, this is actually good. This has helped me understand like everything, because I was familiar with like Žižek and the stuff that Mikey was saying, not only from reading Sublime Object, but also like from listening to Epoch, and then like Pills Bros, and you know, all that stuff. So,
right. So you just went kind of just down the theory tube.
Yeah.
Algorithm, and
exactly.
I was part of it. Cool. Well, you know, it's a weird fucking thing, the internet. We don't quite understand what we're in the midst of right now, and I understand that there's like this like, okay, I don't know, like if I meet like for me at this point, I've met enough people whose videos I've seen that it's like if I see somebody, I kind of just like feel like, oh, I could probably reach out to them. I could probably talk to them. Or if I there's, it's likely that in the future I'll run into them. If they're into anything interesting, I'll probably run into them. And I'm obviously defining interesting by my own, what I find interesting. But I'm just saying that, like, I don't feel like people are out of reach or inaccessible. It's very, very rare that I've reached out to anybody and they didn't respond. Like, and I just don't like to reach out to people, and I don't like to bring new people on usually until I've established some kind of a working relationship outside of, the whole simulated social cloud exchange economy thing, where I don't like, for instance, like where people are in the chat like, oh, you need to go on so-and-so's podcast. No, if you really, really think that so-and-so is like the realist, then you need to get so-and-so to reach out to me, fucking talk to me. Or if I happen to like meet so-and-so at a thing, I'll be like, oh, what's up? So-and-so told me I should talk to you. But it's not going to be like I get on I cold call people through email because someone told me I should go talk to someone. That's kind of like starting out YouTuber shit and like trying to like, you got to like network or whatever. And it's just like, that's why I'm not going to be an influencer. Well, it's one part of why I don't want to be an influencer. Just one little tiny part of why. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons why I want to be an anti-influencer, but that's all neither here nor there. Not really. That's kind of tangential. But it's all as a way to build up to and introduce the topic or point of this conversation, right? So the topic of the video, the title is Not Convinced by Lacan, and then the thumbnail is Slavoj Žižek with a big head and a suit on, like a long, tall, slender body, leaping off of a cliff, like over a chasm over to the other side. And it says very large, leap of faith, ? I just pulled the image off of some Christian blog and then put Žižek's face over it, really. But the point is to talk about this idea of being convinced and faith, and really that comes down to questions of belief. And it opens an opportunity to talk about theory versus ideology. Obviously, they're not always juxtaposed, but in this particular case, I'm going to use them in a way that has them more or less juxtaposed, and I will justify that. And I'm doing it for methodological reasons right now. But the origin of this topic being our focus of interest, it's the main immediate focus. It's not, I mean, we can fucking tangentially go off in whatever direction we want. I might bring it back around as the sort of conversation guider or whatever. But the reason this is where, from whence cometh this question of, the importance of being convinced by Lacan or whatever. It's DDD, whose first name I'm not sure I'm supposed to say online. I don't know what we talk. We already have a relationship, or at least we have communicated somewhat outside of just comments. You know what I mean? Like, he's not just a nobody. He's not a random. He's established himself in my life, not as much as you guys have. I can't go and watch a backlog of his conversations like I can your conversations. But he's a person to me now. More than just a screen name or an avatar, because he's asked a lot of good questions over the last couple of years, or at least a couple. And so this is one of them. The question, basically, he said on the phallus post, video, the last conversation, which is currently called the one about power, part 4 of Žižek and Lacan. This was the episode that ties together the Lacan and Žižek series, is with Michael Downs of The Dangerous Maybe, Mikey, Free Mikey. Well, it's going to have its name changed really quick. It's going to be called The Phallus Ideology and Power, or The Phallus Power and Ideology. I'm going to change the name of that video. But that video was a sort of event. It's a big deal to people who care. to the very small handful of people who currently get it as far as like why it matters, and it paves the way for some real cool shit to come, right? Like for me, the concept of the phallus as well as sexuation, and just Lacanian psychoanalysis more broadly has created a problem for me. It's created complications for me. It has intervened in my theory and practice, just my daily dealings, my habitus, and so this scratches that surface and itch that I've had for a while now. This itch to talk about this, and but it only begins that conversation, and we don't get to just continue that conversation whenever I feel like it, or whenever Michael feels like it, because we are in a situation right now where we're just not able to just turn on cameras and talk whenever we want. In fact, almost never are we able to do it when we want to, and we're especially not able to plan things ahead of time very well. So, season 3, so to speak, it's going to be later, and we're not sure when. But I happen to have this space tonight. I don't normally have access to this space. Never have I ever had access to this space for this purpose. And so this was like, oh, cool. Let's put me in like a good light. I've got this epic background. It's kind of, for the podcast listeners, like, I don't know if I'm overblown, if it's too much light exposure on my face. Maybe I have to turn it down a little bit. Is that better?
Perfect.
But I've got like these great.
It's perfect as it is.
I'm in this awesome space is the point, and I've set up like my studio in this space. I only get to be here tonight, and so I just wanted to use it while I had it, and we wanted to shoot the shit anyway, but I told Andrew about DDD's question on the phallus video the other day, and he shared his thoughts on it, and I shared that question with Michael as well, Michael Downs, and so I know kind of what their positions are on things, and then I've also been fleshing out my own thoughts on what I would say to this question. And right as we were setting up to really start the stream, Nick asked a really good question. He was like, so wait, we're doing a whole stream just on a person's like comment, like, who is this person? Like, why are we doing this? Because in a way it's like, oh, what a stupid thing to do. I don't think that's what you were saying, but at the same time, like, you wanted to know what you're getting into. And so like, why would we do this? Well, I want to just say, to kind of establish my assumptions about like the social space that this is, that we've created by turning on our cameras and having this conversation. I want to turn this space into a place, right? I want to turn point time into event time, and do that by setting up a sort of context with my motives, at least as fleshed out as I understand them. And that's basically just to say that this is, because the internet's not just a homogenous space. One of the most, in the future, when people are media literate, or at least a little bit more so, or when common sense etiquette is a little bit more media literate, people will not go around on the internet acting as though, or at least not as many people will go around acting as though each space needs to be the same norms, the same rules, the same expectations. Any space is different on account of the medium that's being used, the kinds of speakers who are involved, the purposes, values, principles of those people. Like, if your purpose, value, and principle like is like fucking social capital, clout, exchanging on the attention economy so as to build your PMC influencer, career climbing, fucking whatever it is that you're doing, like, then great. But that's a different kind of space, obviously, than if we set up a table in a coffee shop or a university or at any other institution, say a library, and maybe we reserve a room or a venue, or maybe a music venue, and we have the stage, and we invite people to come hear us talk about something that we find interesting, and we assume maybe they will as well. and we want to produce something of quality and something that we take seriously ourselves, because when we set up the microphones and the cameras with that assumption, it has us perform differently than we would if we were just shooting the shit. But at the same time, we just want to shoot the shit, right? We want to kind of straddle these worlds. You know, it's not a conference, it's not a festival, but it's not just a philosophy club. And it's definitely not a lecture, and it's definitely not a graduate seminar. I have relative expertise. It's not even fucking close to some people, but at the same time, I have that in multiple areas, and so it's something that you can get a little ahead of yourself and carried away, and start making claims that are too far-reaching or kind of go outside the parameters of like what the function of the discourse is actually supposed to be in the first place. And so like there's a sort of meta conversation to be had about like why we're doing what we're doing and why a person should care about why we're doing what we're doing. But at the same time, I mean, I know that for a fact Michael Downs' attitude would be like, well, I don't care why a person would care about what we're doing. They either care or they don't. You know, and like he's just doing it because he's interested in it. His form of enjoyment is doing it, and he and I enjoy our conversations, and so we're gonna have the conversations that we're having without going online. But we're also going to, by making it so that a potential stranger could pop in, or that we can watch it after the fact. You know, it kind of gives like the feeling of like public access, and by giving it the feeling of public access, it gives like, oh, the big other could sort of like intervene, but not just that. That's the effect on the psyche, perhaps, but like concretely, an individual singularity who's just a random person might actually pose a question that's like we're thinking about. But more importantly, you build relationships over time. People come to your events. They ask good questions over time. And it gets to a point where it's like a commenter is not just a commenter. They're kind of like a part of a community. Now, I think it's problematic when influencers start being like, I love you guys. You're my community, blah, blah, blah. This parasocial stuff that occurs there is it's an issue, right? I'm not supportive of just doing that without the meta conversation. Okay. With all of that clarified, though, DDD I see as, like many, like say Bode Lacanian or Kenneth or Bert or Anne, anybody who's kind of like in my life and kind of just like likely to hear something that we're talking about, if they ask a question, I don't treat that like it's just a YouTuber commenter. If you come to a conference I'm at and then you ask a question after I give a presentation, I'm going to take that question seriously. And there's a thing that drives me crazy where academics often they have like this way of just like, oh, they're not interested in dealing with that question, so they're not going to take it seriously at all. And I think Slavoj can even be that way. I think that anybody who gets a lot of questions all the time from a lot of people can be that way. And I think it's a basic like, look, you've only got so much time and energy to be able to do this, and that's fair. But I've raised the stakes of what it is that I'm doing, or at least I try to. And part of that is like, I'm not just trying to have a conversation with Mikey that is made accessible for anybody who might already be interested in it. I'm also trying to have a conversation that, to use the popular language, centers the skeptical, critical thinking, aspiring worker, or with earbuds in, or ADHD gamers. Because at a certain point, like that is me. That is me. I am in a sense. And so, but I've spent 10 years doing philosophy, and not nearly as rigorously as some people, and more importantly, not just in one area. And so, like I said, that comes with pros and cons. But one thing that it does is it means that like, oh, so I'm not like a Marxist. I'm like reading Capital and his other works all the time, but it's just like one of the things I cycle between as I have like 20 other threads that I'm working on. And the reason I do it is not so that I can be authoritative in circles where people already use the word Marx as like their master signifier, but instead, and actually I do a lot to repulse those people, like mosquito repellent. I say things, I sprinkle things into my discourse that will repel a regular rank and file member of PSL or the IMT. And that's not because I hate them all or whatever. It's because I'm doing something different, and like I believe that I should hold myself to like this standard. And so I kind of know that you are both, well, I mean, okay, actually Andrew's, was in the IMT for a little bit, so that's funny. But I don't know Nick's politics or anything like that. I know that we're like basically, if we're going to use this tongue-in-cheek term, young Hegelian, or sorry, young, that's a nice slip, young Žižekian. Well then, if we're going to use that as a sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of, a name for ourselves, then it's basically left. You're both probably like basically like left young Žižekians. I'm not post-left Žižekian, but the fact that I have to say that should help situate me a little bit better. You don't have to say that. You don't have to say that. I have to say that I'm not a post-left young Žižekian. Okay, but that puts me in a different situation. And it's definitely different than, say, a right-wing young Žižekian whose goal is to say, like Trey of Telos Bound, for instance, that, the split subject, that Lacan and Žižek are so focused on is actually, split between knowing and not knowing, split between conscious and unconscious, split between, all these different things. Like, no, this is actually all like something that can be solved by, subscribing to an old tradition, in his case, Eastern Orthodoxy, or more broadly Christianity. You're obviously not doing that. You're coming from the left. I am sort of too in a way, but for me, I'm like trying to constantly cycle through suspending presuppositions and interrogate frameworks and take on new perspectives and work through not just the concepts, but try to get back to the things that those concepts are supposed to be dealing with in the first place. And so for me, that's not a dictatorship of the proletariat, and that's not some professional revolutionary or PMC academic rallying of the centering and speaking for, say, the marginalized, speaking for leading from behind or in front, either way. No, I'm not doing either of those things. To a certain degree, if some of that's necessary, great. But what I'm trying to do is a back to the things themselves approach that at the same time is saying there's something important in the critique of political economy, in existentialism, in phenomenology. And so I'm like trying to do all of this as well as trace out some more contemporary topics and books and issues while listening to audiobooks that are related to like 12 or 20 different like ways into all of this while working at Amazon, because I am, at the end of the day, working class intellectual, which is not a noun, but is more of a verb, and is while some people like my friend Elton, who wrote the foreword to my book, is the working class intelligentsia podcast host, definitely check it out. He's got a great podcast on Gramsci, and he's also doing he's taking over a DSA podcast on class. Definitely check him out. But yeah, he'll expand, and I haven't talked to him about this yet. So Elton, if you're listening to this, and you probably are, we'll talk about it over pizza soon, and hopefully actually have our follow-up conversation. But he would expand working class intellectual to just be like, hey, if you're in the working class, whether it's PMC or like, laborer or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You've got an intellect, so you're a working class intellectual. He's not gatekeeping this term. He's very inclusive. It's a very leveling approach. I understand that that's a pedagogically and perhaps politically, strategically, organizational wise important for him to do. But I disagree with it because I think that intellectuals are historically a marginalized group of people. And they're always a minority, and that can make them assholes who kind of just band together and don't worry about people outside of their circles. But the fact is like they grow. If you're an intellectual at all, the chances are you have a lot of people who think that you're wasting your time. They think that they basically are just like, oh, you're fucking doing poetry. I think you're a dipshit, or just like, oh, that's cool. I'm glad that you're into that, but it's just like whatever, right? And so it's like they would prefer to be watching some, like when they're not working and talking about other people and events, then they're watching television or shopping or whatever, and their kind of life revolves around that. And we don't, there's probably a way for us to be respectful of the fact that other people choose to have these interests, but also we're very much aware that we can't just pop off and start talking about this stuff with anybody, anywhere, anytime we want to. As Andrew's meme, the Dos Zeki / Master Signified Bodies meme, where it shows us, which is like where the boy is sitting in the classroom and his face is like all red and he's got veins popping out of his forehead and he's trying so hard not to talk and he's sweating, and it says me trying not to talk about Lacanian psychoanalysis. We want to, and so. But we talk about that. We talk about Marx. I talk about all kinds of shit. And also, it's funny. Like, I don't know. There's a certain degree to which, if you're just like a random person who's been following the channel for a while, there's a lot of stuff that gets talked about offline, just in organic day-to-day relationships too, where it's like I could see a person being like, "Actually, Pleeb, you don't talk about half that shit that you kind of seem to insinuate that you've been talking about." Well, yeah, it's because I don't fucking turn on the camera for every conversation. So the reason we're turning it on today, though, is because I respect this question, not just because I respect this singular person who forwarded it or advanced the topic, but because I think that it is a commonsensical question for a critical working class person who's probably got earbuds in at work and is recently getting into Lacan and Žižek and shit like that and wondering, is it worth it, and why am I doing this, and why are these other people that I'm, for whatever reasons, I'm in their vicinity and they're doing it, like, why are they doing it? If I think that's valid, and that my channel, unlike other channels that don't center such people, I actually feel responsible for thinking about these things. And so, it's one thing for an academic to turn on a camera and share that with the masses, like Daniel Tutt for that symposium that just happened. I remember he called the YouTube commenters like the masses. I remember thinking, like, first of all, like, if you have 20 people or 5 people in your live comments, like, that, for most of them are anonymous and kind of just popping in, not sure why they're even there. And those, do you want to say that that's the masses, or like someone eavesdropping on public transportation? Like what position do you put that person in when that person asks a question? I asked some good questions, I think, in that symposium that never got brought up. They just left it out, like they didn't think it was important or something. And it's like, well, I spend all of my time obsessively getting into theory and thinking about these things, and I spend 12 hours a night when I'm working at Amazon listening to books, trying to get a basis in these discourses. And so when I raise a question and it's not taken seriously, and I'm just seen as part of the masses or whatever, it's like, okay. I mean, I also have a channel. I also have a book. Like, I don't know, like, do I have to have like a university credential to be taken seriously? Well, DDD does not have to have university credentials to be taken seriously, but he is in grad school, and he is in grad school for physics, maths shit. And so, it's more STEM related. And so it's kind of like hats off for already being interested in philosophy or theory in the first place. But perhaps his interest when he came to the channel in the beginning was more bread tube related things when I was doing more of that kind of content. And so anybody who has been paying attention knows we had McGowan on for a Young Žižekians thing, and it was Young Žižekians left and right. And we had McGowan on, and we talked about, like, in defensive theory, that was the topic. That was the name of the title of it. And it was a response to Catron saying, you don't need to waste your time with Lacan. You don't need to waste your time with Zizek, Nietzsche, Heidegger, etc. Or Deleuze, and so, that I wanted to bring McGowan on to hear what he has to say, because I think he thinks it is important. And I think, like, I brought everyone else on because I figured they'd all go, well, no, it is important to me. Now, I'm obviously, like, I brought Trey on. Trey's not a leftist, so why would I bring Trey on? Personally, it's not just the left I'm not just interested in something because of, like, whether it's useful to the left or not. And so for me to bring on a Christian, sort of more conservative, maybe kind of person, who's interested in Zizek, and I thought that person might be able to contribute from a perspective that none of us are taking on, which is, like, this is inherently interesting even without your goals of, like, universal equity or whatever. Fair.
Yeah.
So I know this is a long-winded introduction, and it's the middle of the night for you all, and I want you to both be able to kind of reflect on what your thoughts were when you read this question, and I also want to forcibly make myself here shut up, and so I have an idea that will help with that. And so I think one of you should volunteer, whichever wants to do it, but not just that wants to, but is also good at it. So I don't want someone who's bad at reading a comment to volunteer to read a comment. But if you feel like you're competent and you want to, maybe you could read the question yourself. And then I have a lot of thoughts. And obviously I could talk just for the next 3 hours. But I want you both to share real quick what your initial thoughts were and now are.
Yeah. Definitely. I wouldn't mind volunteering because I got a lot, like, of stuff just formulating from, like, piggybacking off of what you were saying in the introduction. But if you want, I can read the comment.
Yeah.
So
you're posing as the subject supposed to sound competent while reading comments. Good.
Yeah. The subject is supposed to sound competent, but also definitely the subject not supposed to know, because going back to what you're saying before the written comment, like tech bros, like, speaking as far as, like, oh, the masses, right? What do the masses have to say? It's like, as soon as you say the masses, it's like, again, this is me being Lacanian, it's like they don't have to be present. You are already signifying who they are with the select people of discourse. And this is, like, again, like, I'm going to reference a lot of my memes, but, like, again, if you haven't seen my memes, follow me, Master Sigma Bodies on Instagram.
Yeah.
But the fact is, like, Lacan says, it's like the word elephant is a signifier where you don't have to actually have an elephant in the room. There's so much you could do with just the word elephant, and it's so crazy how we can have a conversation about this without the elephant being in the room. We could talk about, the poaching and the effect on, animal cruelty and all these political decisions without them having a voice. This is exactly what they're doing by saying the masses. They're just a blank screen memory or a blank slate that they could just, treat and kind of, like, mutilate and make malleable for whatever they want just by saying the masses. Like, no, you got an engaging audience that's, like, even if the setting is artificial, there is still the slippage of organic process happening because people are sacrificing, their days in real time just to watch what's going on because it's Slavoj Žižek. Now, with that being said, I'll read the comment. It says by the homie Triple D, the fourth member of Ed and Nettie, Triple D. We didn't know about him. Great conversation per usual. I think I'm going to do a bit more of deep dive into Lacan and Žižek through the series, Mikey's blog, and some books. Although I must admit, I am not all convinced by anything I've heard. Maybe I need to take a bit of a leap of faith. Now, I said I was going to reference another meme.
Hold on one sec. I will just say one thing before you carry on. I've got to go off screen to do something, and I'm going to be listening while I'm off screen.
Yeah.
But I'm going to step away from the mic for a minute, and so while I'm listening, Nick, just remember you're able to interject anytime you want. Obviously, you two are very adept at having conversations in my absence. Actually, there's no such thing as a conversation on the internet in my absence when you both know me, because obviously I'm always virtually present because I'm always going to watch it in the future. But yeah, I'm just saying, yeah, you two carry on this conversation for a second. I'm going to be listening. I'll be back in a sec. And I had one other fucking note on that. Well, goddamn. Or whatever. I'll be right back. I'm going to go get my coffee and stuff while I listen in. So, just make sure to also, you two, talk. Nick, you'll be able to share what your initial thoughts were and now, in light of our conversation prior to this conversation, as well as now online, you can talk about what your thoughts now are, and then Andrew, obviously you as well, and then but also make sure to touch on my response a little bit later, and then I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Because I responded in the comments as a provisional answer for then. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely. So one of the things that was pretty interesting is that the thing is that Triple D is pretty much like hystericizing and putting us in subject as question, which, you know, good on him, right? Hegel was the sublime hysteric, and we should love our sublime hysterics. And
the hysteric just being the person who questions the master, the one who's pretending, to be the person who knows it all. So, you know, the hysteric is the person who's like, oh, you are the professor and you supposedly have all the answers. Well, then I've got all the questions. Okay.
Exactly, and then with it's funny how we like had the master discourse of Patron saying you don't need to read these, and here we were, you know, putting him into question. It's like now you got the sublime hysteric that's just like, you know, why do we need to read this, or why how can you convince me? And what I want to lead off of this is my favorite meme template is like the little nerdy kid with the laptop that's hystericizing, and then you got like the three progressively buff dudes with their laptops like giving up all their feedback. It was the one that I made. He's like, hey guys, I'm back again. I have to ask, what's the deal with this Lacan dude? The sniffling Slovenian always mentions him constantly. However, Noam Chomsky refers to him as a charlatan. Can you explain him for me? So pretty much, you know, that's him. So like, and the context of the meme is the fact it's like the first buff dude literally only acknowledges his questioning, but never gives him a direct answer. Just saying that, you know, by putting us as subjects supposed to know, you're just constantly in this dialectic. The other guy says the same thing and just says that Lacan displaces your enjoyment. And then the last guy just only gives him half information, saying that, you know, you should just read seminars 1, 2, and 11. But the whole point is the fact it's like you're never going to get like Lacan, you know, simplified or abbreviated for no matter how many people you ask until you actually engage with Lacan. The point being is the fact it's that psychoanalysis is definitely not something that people are attuned to in day-to-day conversations, especially even in like Theorygram or like TheoryTube. It's one of those ones where it's just like has this weird jargon. It's like phallus, partial object, sexual satisfaction, libido, what? Oedipus complex. It's just like, you know, and then you got Freud, you know, in there. So people like were like, well, I like Jung just because he's the lesser of the evil, but why Freud? And then it's like now you got Lacan. But what I'm trying to say is the fact that, and I was mentioning this earlier, Lacan has a unique, interesting like concept of subjectivity, and it still aligns with Hegel, Sartre, and Zizek in the fact that it's split, meaning that there is an ontological gap that keeps it from absolute knowing, and at the same time, this contradiction determines it further. But the main thing that Lacan has is a really rigorous theory of desire that no political praxis or theory has. And I always forget this name of this dude. I'll figure it out one of these days, but he made another discourse in Lacanian theory called the capitalist discourse. To bring that into perspective, it's the way that we function, and a discourse is going to have to do with like a series of sets of practices. But for Lacan, it has to do with a matter of speech, because language is important to him. The way that we communicate in capitalism functions and structures our desires and our fantasy, and desire is structured by lack, and that capitalism promotes the excess of us being ourselves. But when we get that in the form of the commodity, we don't feel like we're ourselves, so we're always in forever lack. And this is something that's crucial in Zizek, and obviously, like I said, Lacan, Tom McGowan. But what makes it vital is the fact that this is something that cannot be explained by Marxism without subjectivity, because the workers don't act in their self-interest; they act in the interest in the discourse of capitalism. They are exchanging themselves for commodities because their subjectivity has been commodified. Their self-interest is, even if they have like this understanding, like, yo, I've been reading more about Mao, reading more about Lenin, and I'm kind of like considering myself a leftist. I like Bernie. Consciously, yeah, but unconsciously, their desire is structured in the linguistic aspect that conforms to capitalism. So at the end of the day, they will continue to do capitalist discourse whether they like it or not, because that is where the desire aligns. And the thing is, we got to understand, what is this desire? Desire is something that is unconscious, and it's structured again like a language. And what that means for Lacan is the fact that language, rather than communicating meaning, or even like on the level of words, what it is a set of signifiers and signs that put together a system that's referential, and it's always piggybacking and exchanging, but it evokes an other.
But if you
Rather
what?
than it evokes an other, a listener, one
Right.
who wants to listen, speak back, rather than communicating a meaning and getting the message back.
Right.
It's the evoking the IU relationship.
It is.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah, and so who is the thou of the discourse? Yeah.
exactly. And so, who is the thou of the discourse, right? Who is the thou in capitalism? It's just this abstract law, but it's always reified in all of us, and we are duped to believe that everybody has this, thou to my I, but really we're not. Nobody has that. That's also the part of the lack of subjectivity. So there's just a lot going on in there. And as far as like Lacan for the social political aspect, that kind of helps reconcile like the problems of like leftist theory. You have people like Todd McGowan, you know, Sheldon George with racism and understanding like the problems of jouissance and racism, Slavoj Žižek, of course. But when you go into Lacan, it's not even just the fact of like understanding the simple concepts like desire or jouissance or subjectivity, but you have like the like clinical, the political, and the social, and it's helped philosophy grow even further because
You cut
like
out for a second.
Gowan
So
said,
you cut out for a second. You said what are those three? Those three: political,
oh,
therapeutic,
the social, and the clinical. And
clinical.
like and yeah, the clinical aspect, but also the fact that psychoanalysis in general has pretty much helped revolutionize subjectivity and philosophy in general, and it's something that has reflected Hegel. And Tom McGowan says that if psychoanalysis was around when Hegel was alive, or if Hegel was around still a little longer when Freud was around, he would have been a psychoanalytic thinker, because he has theories of like repetition and failure. The only thing that he doesn't have is overdetermination and a structure of the unconscious. But with that being said, I'll kind of leave room for Nick to kind of piggyback off of that.
Well, I think that it really comes down to everything we're talking about is like the structure of desire. And that ultimately that's going to be the most difficult concept to really grasp for anyone who's new to Lacan, but even anyone who's new to dialectical materialism in one form or another, because you're talking about the limits of a certain reality that might present itself as an entity or an essence, but the limits itself, like those limits are what blur the lines between what's being talked about. So just to bring that back to the comment we read before, it's like, I think that the like the charity and generosity in that message was actually justified, and that like I could see if you were to come across the conversation that we're having about the phallus, about the quilting point.
Oh shit. Oh fuck. I'm sorry. I got cut off. You're saying about the phallus, so yeah, you're saying you understand. So can you start that?
I can see like why it would be disorienting, only in that like the discourse that is being presented here is one where there is no prescribed entry point. There is no prescribed entry point politically, philosophically, or just in terms of everyday commonsensical apprehension of reality. There is a necessity to take a leap of faith, in the sense that just as like when you habituate yourself to any kind of discourse, there is a kind of vocabulary that comes with it. It's only that like that's happening all the time in every facet of life. You're all like, if you start a new job, you are habituating yourself to a new kind of discourse, a set of values and terms that you're going to be using, but you accept that on the basis of the value of like the context of what it is you're entering into. I think that like there is no good argument for why you should just get into Lacan from an apolitical point of view and just accept an entire suite of concepts and values and terminology that you're not used to, especially when it's like the phallus or whatever. Like, of course that's going to be jarring, but it's like, here you have an invented discourse that has evolved like all of its own with, you know, help along the way. But like, this is what me and Andrew often talk about, is that Freud was a self-revisionist thinker. Yes. He revised his own system constantly.
Yes.
At a point, he only published case studies that went wrong, because that's how much faith he had in his own technique. Now, this is a technique that is by no means finished, completed, or even understands how to situate itself. But because we're talking about faith, there is, and I'm loath to use this word, but an empirical basis to the use of this technique and what its consequences have to do with ontology, epistemology, philosophy in general.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to connecting it with the political implications of that, that's not the easiest thing to sort out immediately. Not at all, because it necessarily involves a kind of reorganization of your own sense of where you are in the world, how you're situated. So, but to situate psychoanalysis, which in itself, as an aspiring science, already has to, by definition, admit to its own shortcomings, its own impossibility of being. Because when, sorry, my camera.
Yeah, it sounds like you fell into a well.
I just fell into a well of my own, but
yeah. Well, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
You buffed me.
Shit, what the fuck happened?
Hold up. Shit, what the fuck happened? This fucking camera.
This is good. This is good. I want you to be able to finish what you're saying.
All right. So without being able to see me, maybe it's better that way. Like it's the one discourse that accounts for itself as a form of discourse.
Perfect.
And only a discourse and only a semblance of what communication would be. And of course, to me, like the most prophetic pronouncement that Lacan ever made, if I was going to like home it in on one pronouncement, it would be there is no meta language, essentially. There is no meta language. And psychoanalysis is the one technique that allows for the impossibility of meta language.
What does that mean?
And the idea that the discourse that cannot comment on itself by definition. So it almost like has to endlessly leave room for where it falls short of its own standards for what it imposes as a philosophy. Because and this is something Žižek says, it's like Lacan revealed what was ultimately foreclosed. Psychoanalysis revealed what's foreclosed in philosophy, what becomes impossible in philosophy, and what like allows us to almost like wipe clear the entire slate of like most of what philosophy was trying to attempt to address, because it's already by definition impossible. Psychoanalysis is the language of impossibility, ultimately. It's the only way that impossibility can be articulated.
Cool. So this is perfect. So I think this sets up a person then just to ask a very basic question, which is then, but why? Like, why spend so much time fucking with an impossibility? And why am I hearing myself? Now that I'm talking, I'm hearing myself. It's echoing. What happened?
All right, we're on the.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. But okay, so
I would say that in terms of modernity, we live in a time of endless possibility, and this is the horror of being alive today. It's like when people talk about nihilism, which I think it's a kind of lame to just resort to nihilism as like an argument or like an excuse for like, put everything under the umbrella of nihilism, because it's like, no, the so-called nihilist, if it's like Joker or whatever, like, that figure, even like the edgelord, like still kind of believes in something. It's like even nihilism would be something that would have to be achieved.
Yes. Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah.
Just real quick. That right there is an edifice of the fact of somebody trying to embody a meta language. And I mentioned Hegel.
What does that mean? I don't understand what you mean.
So the Joker and somebody who wants to embody nihilism and stand in the threshold of all discourse, like, oh, why deal with it if it's impossible, right? It's all meaningless anyway. Fuck politics, fuck philosophy, fuck science. I'm just going to live my own life because it's all meaningless. But yet that they act in this weird Joker, like, I'm just this lone Sigma wolf, and I do as I please while everybody else is just absurd. This is an example of what Hegel would call the beautiful soul. And what I mean by that is that they're trying to embody a meta-language and try to be able to critique everything from an outside perspective, as if they have that sort of authority to pass a judgment without, like, limits put on them.
All right, so I think you both are giving good answers. Let's be clear. First of all, I think that these are good answers. I hope that they're answers that are going to provoke good conversation or thought for someone like DDD. For anyone, I think, like I said, a commonsensical but critical thinking, skeptical kind of worker with earbuds or an ADHD gamer, I think is going to be like, yeah, this is interesting. But also I think that there's a bunch of problems that would still. So I think the biggest problem is that for me it's less of a problem, and I'll be able to explain why it's less of a problem for me in a bit. But for a person who's heard me say, or you guys, or anybody in the conversation we had in defensive theory, that a Marxist, for instance, like somebody who thinks, okay, well, there's not just a Marxist, anybody who thinks there's serious problems in the world, we need to be figuring out solutions to those problems. The point is not just to interpret the world, but to change it. Fair enough. Anybody who thinks that, fair enough. The onus is on us to at least say why we are existing adjacent to them in the world, talking about this stuff that is supposedly, we kind of insinuate or sometimes outright will say, necessary for anybody who wants to be able to change the world, because addressing the world in ways that are fundamental, or like, let's just say either changing the whole world for the better or at least just surviving for your own good. In either of these cases, you have a pre-interpretation of things already going for you. There is no just changing the world. Changing the world always presupposes having an interpretation. The question is that interpretation that you already have something that you just take to be reality, unmediated, crystal clear? It's just like the table in front of me. It's like the chair that I'm sitting on, a concrete reality. Are you taking your interpretations to be, are they invisible to you? Is the fact that you've already interpreted the world invisible, and instead you think you have a clear perception? If so, I don't know that I could really convince you of anything anyway. Now, I'm not saying DDD thinks that, but I'm just saying, if a person were to think, I'm not going to fucking argue with a person like that, for fuck's sakes. If you think that you've got you definitely have no interest in theory if you think that that's true. There's no point doing theory if you think you have unmediated, crystal clear perception of things, and you don't need to interrogate rigorously the presuppositional framework and concepts that you've already inculcated, internalized, through socialization and normalization in a society as a person who grew up through a schooling system in a specific set of relations to power within the family, within the school, within what other institutions you've participated in, or in whichever ways you've been around other people who've been through all of that. And like me, you actually you didn't go through all of that. You didn't do this march through these institutions. And so your programming came a bit later, and it came as a sort of like, it's helping you understand where other people are coming from. I think, though, that just because, so that's fine. I can say that, okay, if you already think that you basically have a crystal clear perception, interpretation seems like a liability, you need to be focused on changing the world. Why are you on YouTube? Why are you reading books? Why are you doing philosophy? Why are you doing theory anyway? Now you want to hystericize the person who is doing it. Well, that person came along and said, you need this. And I say guilty as charged. That's because Catrone said you don't need it. And so that put me in the situation to have to say, you do need it. But here's the problem, though. If I'm saying you need it, and then doing videos with Mikey where we're breaking down concepts, what that does is it makes the person go, oh, well then this video, its purpose, at least in part, needs to be that it is satisfying my sort of why should I give a fuck about it criteria. I have rigorous or I have a serious sense of a rigorous epistemic humility and intellectual integrity, meaning that I don't just dive in the deep end with fucking anything. Astrology, fucking Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, United States patriotism, the military, the whatever it is, whatever it is, you go, no, someone's trying to sell me something. I'm critical of being sold stuff. Generally speaking, people are always selling discourses at me. And some people think they shouldn't have to do real work, that they just get to exist talking about Joyce, or that they just get to exist on an office computer somewhere, inputting numbers for some private capitalist, while other people dig the ditches for the pipes that everyone relies on. And they're going to die younger. They're going to be lacking the social, cultural, and economic capital, the connections, the knowledge and understanding for operating in this world. And we say, yeah, by right, we need people who are focused on manual labor. And some of us don't have to do manual labor. Some of us get to sit in and by the way, I don't mean to throw you, Nick, under the bus. I know you're not, your lifestyle and your job is not just talking about Joyce. So that is not what I'm saying at all. But the person who is skeptical, including myself, of a bunch of people who get together and talk about something that they're all just like, yeah, well, we think it's serious. And they're like paid academics. They're either on a salary or they're salary track, hoping to get some kind of either a big following online or what's the word for they can't fire you in academia?
Tenure?
Yeah, tenure. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, which, by the way, tenure track nowadays is such a long track. It's very hard to get tenure. And so an academic has to go through a lot of hoops in that. And it's not usually beneficial to ask certain questions that scare the good old boys or the people that you're trying to impress on your path towards getting that tenure. And so, but then there's that populist sort of element, and I use this word not in the right-wing sense, but in the more broad sense, that goes back to its roots, just in like regular working people, bourgeois and proletarian alike, peasant as well, who think, I don't trust that the bureaucrats and office officials or C-suite corporate managers and HR representatives like Simon Sinek, Robin DiAngelo, Brene Brown, Jordan Peterson, any of these people who are going around giving talks at Google, doing TED Talks, I just don't trust them. I don't trust that they have the same class interests as I do, because their entire life presupposes and relies on a division of labor that even if you redistribute a little bit more economic wealth, or even if you sell a little bit of self-help that will help that person slightly better their situation, you are nevertheless presupposing an entire system that means you will always be the person who doesn't say, I've learned a lot, I'm going to share that with you, and we're going to reason together, or I'm going to give you the tools to be able to reason. No, it comes from a position of, it's my job to think, it's your job to do. I'm here to edify you, the doer. So that's my dignifying of the hysteric in this situation. Now, obviously, I don't want to presuppose too much about like what DDD's intentions are, but I also ask questions in chats or in the comment sections or at a conference or anywhere. I'll ask a question where it's like not even my question. I just know a lot of people who would want to answer this who would want to ask this question, and I know a lot of people who just get nervous when real shit questions are asked, and it's because ultimately behind all of the oh, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, oh, that's irrelevant, oh, that concern is irrelevant, oh, your presuppositions, your interpretations, they bring too much baggage into this discourse, it's irrelevant to me, I don't have the time for this, whatever. That's the attitude of a lot of academics, obviously. I see behind the affect of dealing with that, which I'm sympathetic of. Be operating behind all of that is a definite class interest, and the definite class interest is of maintaining the distinction between those who do and those who think. Now, obviously, they like to obfuscate class by talking about intellectual labor. Oh, we're doing intellectual labor. Okay, well, when someone's digging a ditch to lay down a pipe so that sewage runs out of the street and we don't have to deal with like shit and piss in our daily lives and the Black Plague. Like when someone is going to die younger and also probably have to go into bankruptcy or damn near because they have a hip problem or a back problem because they've been digging ditches for us. That's a different kind of labor than sitting around talking about something you find interesting in the humanities. And when that thing sitting around in the humanities makes an audacious claim that says, you want to change the world? You need us. It's like, whoa, the stakes just got raised in a different way than what they're doing over at the symposium. At a symposium where all the academics are already like, what we're doing is important, we know it's important, we're focused on that, and we're just doing it. We don't feel a responsibility to respond to the masses. We don't feel a responsibility to have this meta discourse about the maintenance of a kind of division of labor that presupposes not just that the subject's supposed to know or like plays with maybe we're not really in the subject. No, presupposes that the vast majority of subjects aren't supposed to know. I'm bothered by that deeply, by this idea. And so I raise the stakes quite a lot with the framing of the Y theory conversation. And so, if Trey from Telos Bound is going to keep doing Young Žižekian stuff, but it's not related to that, and it doesn't have that ethos, it's not bothered by that division of labor, it doesn't care about capital, it doesn't care about racism, it doesn't care whatever, well then it does care about some traditional framework that didn't just not care about those things but actually perpetuated those things, then that's just the right version of this this Young Žižekian thing. But like the Young Žižekians who will say Žižek is important for understanding and organizing the working class, well then shit, the fucking stakes just got raised. Because if you actually care about the working class, not just, they deserve, working people deserve a little bit more representation and redistribution, a little bit more opportunities for recognition. No, if you're actually for abolishing bullshit jobs and redistributing the most physically taxing kinds of labor that make people stupid and mean in a lot of cases, that make it so that people's drive is not able to develop in a way that has outlets outside of or beyond the base animal appetites and entertainment, distraction, Netflix, alcohol, harder drug kinds of outlets, sex, whatever, that are the typical outlets of a working class or lumpen proletarian or precariat or whatever kind of person, however you want to describe them, but obviously not a typical Lacanian. If you're trying to tell that person that they need this, not just for if they want to make political change, but also if they want to understand themselves and live the examined life, the stakes just got raised. And so I'm for taking that shit very seriously. And so when other people aren't bothered with it because it's just like they're confident, they know what matters to them, and they're not trying to sell anything to anybody. Mikey's not trying to sell anything to anybody. He has spent an obsessive, crazy amount of time for 17, 18 years grinding on philosophy 6 hours a day because he enjoys that. He enjoys it. He also hates it. He struggles with it. He wrestles with it. He tears himself up and gets in his own way over it. But he is having fun doing that. It is his jouissance. He's not trying to sell anybody on it. He's not even like... He does have a Patreon, but he's not saying, everybody, you need what I have. You need what you have if you want to change the world. If you want to change the world, you need to sign up to my No, he's not doing this. Now, when someone takes over Zero Books and has a Patreon and is ostensibly a leftist and is speaking from the left and talks about class, it's kind of like, well, shouldn't you be? Or like someone like Catrone is talking and assuming, like, remember I told him I'm a skeptical worker, I want you to speak to skeptical workers, and then halfway through the conversation he's like, no, I'm talking about the kinds of students who come through my classes. And I'm like, the kinds of students who come through your classes aren't the people that I'm talking about, though. And so I'm asking you to take on a new other, a new thou in the discourse, and to re-articulate yourself in a way that you weren't before. This kind of hysteric intervention, if we want to use that overused fucking word, because these academics use the fuck out of that word. I hate it. But if you want to say, well then, what would it mean to raise the stakes here on that? I'll just say one thing before I hand the ball back over here. I'm going to have to charge these headphones in a second. And, but I want to, because it keeps like going in my ears. It's annoying as fuck. But, and if these cut off, the audio might cut out. So I really have to finish my piece here and hand the hot potato back over to you both so you can kind of share your thoughts here. But before I do, I just want to make a distinction about audiences. There's a very sort of self-congratulatory, narcissistic, I mean, to be fair, I don't want to overuse that word. I don't really mean that in all of its negative connotations, but a self-centered kind of self-congratulatory way of assuming that the people who tune in are the people who matter. Because if a person tunes in, then they get it. They're part of the advanced whatever. They're advanced because they care about what I care about. And it's a very vanguardist or professional managerial class or professional revolutionary or old left or new left kind of set of assumptions to say that the advanced workers or the woke or conscious marginalized are the ones who agree with me. So, I mean, we can be self-critical of that and obviously at the same time be like, yeah, well, to a certain degree, just like I care about what I care about. If a person's tuning in for it, of course, they're advanced, right? Okay, but what makes a person advanced? Are they advanced because they care about what I care about? You know, desire of the other. They want what I want, so they fucking get it. That's a consumerist fucking idea. No, like, oh, they want to wear the shoes that I wear, but they're not going to wear the exact same shoes. They're going to get something that is kind of, you know, semiotically related to my shoes, but it's not the exact same shoes because then they're obviously copying me. But they see what I'm doing. It's fashionable. It's hip. It's now. It's not yesterday. It's not 5 years ago. It's not so back then. Like this hipster sort of weird progressive thing, once you start noticing it, it is one of the central operating assumptions and sort of criteria by which people and ideas are judged within these circles, whether we're talking about Lacanian academic circles or we're talking about contemporary MMT or DSA style activism. There is just this self-congratulatory, hipster, fashionable, advanced people are the ones who desire the way I desire. And then there's going, no, obviously, though, if what we're talking about is inculcating or equipping and raising up, empowering a working class or, intelligentsia, then it's not just the people who want what we want or want to be a part of whatever it is that we're doing. It's also people who have a fucking hardcore sense of intellectual integrity that can't be compromised without making them feel like they're selling themselves short, making them feel like they're selling themselves out. I feel that way. I can't just get on board with something. I will explain in a little bit. I hinted at this earlier. I will explain in a little bit if you all hold me to this and don't let me forget. But I will want to talk about why I'm fine not holding, say, Mikey in the last, 2.5 years of these conversations that have been public, 5 years of these conversations that have been off the books. I'm not trying to. I'm fine taking the leap of faith, to use DDD's term, even though I don't think that's quite what it is. I call it theory pill. I think he should take the theory pill. So make sure to, when I'm going to go off mic here and go get my charger, and maybe you guys, after you guys have shared and talked about your thoughts and stuff, maybe we'll touch a little bit on this idea of getting theory pilled and why I think it's not just a leap of faith, but why, even if it was, it's okay, because it's not the same as just buying into and like kind of brainwashing yourself in an ideology. Why I see ideology and theory different, and how I understand and define the difference here. I really want to bring up that distinction. This might be one of the most important conversations on my channel, because I have at this point refined my theory of that difference. And I'm not talking about Žižekian ideology. I'm talking about ideology as worldview, as Weltanschauung, to use the German. This goes far beyond like the specifics of a Žižekian discourse. I do obviously think he has a lot to add to ideology, but I'm talking about ideology as like Marxism is an ideology, or Lacanianism can be an ideology, as opposed to doing theory, and why doing theory sometimes requires this taking the theory pill and just diving in thing. I want to talk about that as well. But I'm going to do one thing really quick, because I'm just going to go ahead. Listen, it's bad resolution, this whole video. It's pissing me off. Do you guys think we should leave it with bad resolution, or should we just take a quick little break so you can all go to the bathroom so that I can fix the resolution? Because I'll have to drop the stream. In the future, it'll look like nothing happened. But for the people who are live right now, it'll stall out for a second while I fix the resolution of this video. Should I do that? Or do you guys think it's fine?
Why not? Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, run to the bathroom, do whatever you gotta do. I'm just gonna fix this really quick. It'll just be a second. And I'm starting recording right now. And so this is part 2, and it should be coming through. This is part 2, and it should be coming through any second on YouTube, but it will be delayed by a second. And let's see, do we have anybody in the chat? Anonymous Botch is in the chat, and had said that the audio was coming through good. Said, I tell the truth, but all the truth, not all the truth, the not all. Lacan's is still the most radical model of subjectivity. Everyone plays the subject supposed to know except Lacan. Actually, that's a really good point we should get into. Yeah, and so brought up deprogramming. Yeah, so you can use theory and diving in the deep end, taking the theory pill, as a form of radical deprogramming, at the same time that it seems like you're just going all in on something that hasn't been approached in a traditionally American or British Anglo-Saxon sort of way, which the more analytic approach, when we use the word critical thinking, because I remember Andrew had said, oh, well, critical thinking, why do you have to take a leap of faith for critical thinking? And I said, well, Andrew, that would be true if everyone used the term the way I know you're using it. But most people are using it in this sense that means you evaluate every argument that is being made from positions that are not yours in a proposition by proposition way, seeing if the conclusions follow from the premises. And if those premises don't all check out, then you put the conclusion under question, especially if that conclusion runs counter to your current position. And if you're someone who's especially like an analytic philosopher, like that guy who wrote The Plurality of Worlds, his name is escaping me right now, but in The Plurality of Worlds, he talks about, like, you don't want to just take, he says you want to take common sense, because common sense is so big and it's so much, it would be too much work to be too critical of common sense. And plus, common sense is probably often getting at something true. And so, and you have to operate in the world. And so, Occam's razor comes in useful. You don't really, go with a theory just because it has explanatory power. It also has to be repeatable, and you have to be able to test it, because otherwise you get charlatan PMC academic or snake oil salesman, fucking YouTube versions of door-to-doors for their Patreons bothering your attention and your eyeballs, saying, hey, look over here, what we're doing is important and you need what we're doing. And we want to respect that, but at the same time understand that there might be a time and place for not doing that analytic approach that does what we would call standard British Anglo-Saxon analytic, skeptical, proposition by proposition. Does it lead to this conclusion? I said that these headphones were about to break, so they did. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you all get where I'm coming from. I'm going to go ahead, shut up, and start listening to hear what you all have to say. So I know it's a lot, so what do we want to say? What do we want to do here for the next half hour?
Well, I really like oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about, I feel like the through line right now between Marx and Lacan is a kind of mystification and demystification. And I would say, just to address what you're talking about, Dave, here with like, how do you appeal to people who feel like what they're dealing with is a jargon that's inaccessible, exclusive, and frankly, like on the surface of it can seem classist. Well, it's like we already live in an age of demystification where it's like obviously nobody trusts the media. Everyone is some version of a conspiracy theorist in a way, and the logic of conspiracy theory, whether like you're into conspiracy theories or not, it's like is still a dominant logic. I think Žižek says it's our modern day theology, essentially. So that kind of logic, it's not so much like the conclusions you draw or feeling, non-duped in a sense. But there is something to be taken from the questioning and attempt to demystify what it was mystified.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like this concept of mystification in the Marxian sense, as I understand it, dictates the logic of much of what we deal with today. And like what people are trying to figure out. And like from a Hegelian standpoint, the thought does align perfectly with the actual material consequences of these things. Like they are one and the same. It's like, you will suffer the material consequences of capitalism, but still come to a theoretical conclusion. And that theoretical conclusion is going to be more than likely based on like a series of mystifications. That is what is condensed in any kind of system of thought and any kind of conclusion that one would like stake their claim on one way or another. Even maybe the ideology that we're pushing in a sense, but it's like theory advocates the value of a demystification.
Yes.
Of a certain situation to a point where all of like the interlaced values and subject positions that you assume throughout your life are also called into question. So it's like, who could be induced to do that when they have real non like theoretical or as you always put it, Andrew, like psychologically mood-based states to deal with. Of course, it's like, but here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that to be in a situation of destitution, just in terms of resources, does not mean that you don't already deal with the same kind of existential, quote unquote, existential, luxuries of like being internally conflicted as other people do.
Mm-hmm.
Like that in itself, like these kind of separating out, like segregating these kind of phenomenological experiences is already itself a form of imposing class onto a certain situation where it's like, we're always put in the position of trying to justify theory to a hypothetical working class, but it's always like a hypothetical working class that would be, hypothetically open to these ideas. But it's like, yeah, there are classist connotations to it, but like we've already defined and like characterized an addressee here when we're talking about like trying to justify theory.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense of like, well, what's this going to do for me? It's like you can never justify the utility of theory in terms of the very system that's trying to be overthrown through the very like logic of theory, through the very employment of these concepts. But at the same time, yeah, like the idea that you could make it in any way like palatable and immediately accessible to an ideal audience member is like already compromising some of it. So I would say that like in terms of making theory something that's accessible to the working class, like you would have to rethink what the working class even is.
Yeah.
You'd have to rethink what you imagine they would find appealing. And like you'd also have to rethink this logic of just like what's utilitarian and pragmatic and something that's like, use value always implies exchange value. And maybe what you can like do to the extent of appealing to people is rather than trying to always explain like the use value of something, an idea or way of the world, try to subvert the logic of exchange value. And that people like, I feel like people can get into. And then you can lead people down the path of theory.
Yeah. No,
Because that's something like everything goes into use value and exchange value is a kind of mystification that is made up of all of these libidinal endpoints that are all tied together.
And that leads into the commodity fetishism of the aspect of not only like the day-to-day lives, but even the theory aspect. And, even though you would try to say like, well, this is more pragmatic, there's more of a fetishization to it. Look at Stoicism. And, like everything else that's in like the theoregram of like what you should listen to and what you shouldn't, it seems like. And not for like the utility is like always going to be the justification towards the end, but it's really there's an exchange of your attention, of your time, and of your energy.
And what also could be a signifier?
Yes.
Like what could also take the place of certain signifiers. Now, all of this sounds so airy if you're not already into like the kind of vocabulary we're using. So it's like, like this idea of just like foregoing the vocabulary for plain speech is something that is like often promoted, as opposed to like that there is this plain speech, that there's this especially at this point that there's this common parlance that everybody could pick up on that would appeal to everybody, but like that is in itself like the impossibility that is what it's related to, like the atomization of all of our lives, because it's like if you think about there being like a working class that has like any kind of like you know mono like or
Monoculture, like
monolithic
with monoculture.
monolithic mindset, then there then you would already assume that like these French names or whatever would alienate those people, but it's like that you've already imagined what this monolithic culture is. But on the other hand, there is like an adherence to a monolithic culture when it's in the name of a kind of like resistance. It's only that in America we have like all these modalities of pseudo resistance that convince people to rally behind certain cultural signifiers that don't even end up getting the level of scrutiny that they should, because they only represent a kind of resistance, but it's like a pseudo resistance. It's a fake form of transgression. If I would say that if you have any real intention of transgressing the logic of a predominant political ideology and have accepted that this political ideology has a continuity across the board from right to left, if you've already accepted that, then theory is your way out. To an extent, it won't solve every problem, but it will be a kind of exit from that. And you will be caught up, like it's not like you're going to be free. It's like you will be entangled in the tentacles of like all of these arguments, and a lot of the time it's going to seem vain and self-serving and pretty much oriented towards bullshit, but at the same time you have at your fingertips an entire vocabulary and calculus that is not available to you if you remain within a certain kind of discourse, and it is linguistically structured. It is a certain language that you are confined to, and that is what theory can do for you, is free you from being trapped within a certain horizon of discourse, which is really the thing that's strangling all of us, ultimately. And I'm not trying to take that away from like the immaterial conditions of it, but what Lacan reveals is that the material conditions are still attached to a certain linguistic framework, and that's the thing to be transcended. How do we do that? I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good concise answer to that question.
Fair enough. And that's a beautiful cat. What's that?
That's the thing. We're not subject supposed to know, because at the end of the day, if we had the answer, then we're giving the hysteric the demand and not displacing the enjoyment of the logic of capitalism.
Fair enough.
That's the main thing.
So we should still foil. We should still foil that desire of the other, and not,
And that's what philosophy should be doing. Look at Socrates. He never allowed anyone to adhere to their own enjoyment or give ground relative to their desire, because he was always like, he wasn't giving them an ideal or anything. He was like taking their conclusions to the limits of the definitions of virtue and piety, and it was pissing them off. It was, they're getting pissed off because they couldn't enjoy their definitions. Or I learned it from this sophist, because he's the wisest one. He teaches rhetoric, yada yada yada, and he's just asking questions and literally giving the enunciation of the subject in question, and pretty much to repeat myself, not allowing them to enjoy their ideology or their ideals of politics, of morals, of virtue. Do you have anything to say?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot, and I'm sitting here trying to think how to hold it all together. I guess the most important. The most important. Can you all hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Cool. So like the. I think following up on Nick, the most what you just said. The working class is not a monolith. It's not like it's funny to me when a person thinks the working class is a certain way. It's like obviously it's a pretty diverse thing. We're not talking about just the proletariat. We're talking about the working class. It's a very much wider range thing than just than an industrialized army. So we're talking about a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of values, perspectives, and things, and we can't ever articulate ourselves to like this sort of phantom. And it's if we don't talk about this stuff and actually work it out a little bit, then we probably do it more, right? So it's good to think about that. But I think it's good to like, in a certain way, it's just like, well, I've got to do this for myself, right? And so it's just like, for me, I just go, well, I'm thinking like someone who here's my standard, working class person. It's basically someone who probably listens to shit like Joe Rogan, and you work with them and like they're funny. I don't know, but like they don't give a shit usually about most things political, or they have a lot of opinions but they don't usually express them, or they have some opinions and they express them but they're not really they want to think about those things critically. They've basically it's just a mode,
Can I cut in?
And then I'll just say a couple in a second. I just want to say that like the person I'm thinking of is like a kind of person who ends up asking me why I care. But is also, I'm thinking of just literally myself in the past, like how I try to think what I would have thought, like when I worked at a grocery store night shift and I'd never heard of philosophy before. And I don't think people have to always talk assuming that person, but I just think that for something to be like understandable to a person who doesn't read, but who is smart, but listens to podcasts and, listens to just whatever the fuck the media algorithm thing is showing that person, and then that person gets into philosophy or theory. Like that's who I'm thinking about. And so it's like, look, does that exclude a lot of people? Yeah, I'm sorry. But I hope everybody does it in their own way so that enough people get reached in whatever ways they need to be able to get access to this shit. So I'm not like the one-stop, shop for this kind of stuff, but I think we all just have to assume an audience, and I think of an audience of just like, okay, I think I've organizing in a blue city in a red state. The kinds of people you work with there, and then the people you work with in the rural area there. Like I just think of my life, my stretch of like working across over 20 different places, right? I just think of those people. And the thing is most of the time, most of the stuff that I do it's not necessarily to those people. In fact, most of my stuff is not to those people or to that person. It's not to my former self, for instance. It's to prepare me and a handful of other people to be able to talk to that person, because we're not there yet, and it's going to be hard. And that's the reason why a lot of people don't want to do it right now, and they just do what they do, which is kind of just conserve their time and energy, focus it on exactly what they find interesting, and assume that the advanced people are the people who already agree with them. So it's like, trying to convince someone that your thing is important who might be a little adjacent to you or whatever. But to me, it's like there's also just like selling something versus being like, if you're into this kind of thing, then you'll like this. It's different, And so is it is Lacanianism an ideology? Is a really interesting kind of question. And I want to, so I guess I said earlier, I just want to do it before I forget, but I said earlier, I would just say the distinction between ideology and theory. For me, I remember I said Marxism, is an ideology. Mormonism is an ideology. What does that mean to say that it's an ideology as opposed to a theory? Well, for me, a theory is a set of operating assumptions as opposed to a set of dogmas. It's a completely different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one thing to add on that is that it's like at the end of the day, there's always going to be that split between ideas and the material world and their interplay, their determination to be Hegelian about it. And ironically, I'm going to use that Althuserian, even though he's like anti-Hegelian. It's like these French dudes, like the more anti-Hegel they are, the more Hegel they are. But the fact is that ideology and philosophy itself operates as an ideology, especially in neoliberalism. To the extent and the details, I won't get into at least right now because I know Nick wanted to say something. But the one thing I wanted to point out is that it's really pretty much philosophy and theory in the way that we use it as a praxis to dispel ideology is that it demystifies, as you're saying. However, in the way that, how you said, like, how can, Lacanian theory be an ideology, at least in a more pejorative sense, is the fact that it could mystify more than it could demystify and allow one to unprogram or deprogram themselves within the symbolic network that they live in, the culture, the signifiers that operates, that keeps them compulsively repeating what the big other wants them to do, sacrificing and sabotaging life and never having answers, and either believe that they're not duped by the system because, as Nick pointed out earlier, there is this kind of discourse of how everybody feels like they're a conspiracy buff of some sort, or they really don't trust the government. They think there is some cabal or somebody pulling the strings, or the fact that, like, they're just like, I used to kind of be political and now I'm just not. And then you got people that are just either like, libertarian because they hate Democrats or Republicans. But, at the end of the day, I think this kind of, libertarians are a little weird in the way that they do business, but there's really no other option to allow yourself not to enjoy, as Zizek says with like the Bartleby politics. So, I prefer not to in any of these choices. And it really shows the fact that ideology operates and mystifies a lot. And Zizek says that we act as what he calls practical solipsists, in which we think that the material conditions, the economic, political, have no control on my personal life. And we walk around believing that, and it is only once we make a purchase with our own money that we work hard for that we believe that we have economic determination by choice, not by the latter, and the fact that it really does reign over you. Like, look at 2008 with the housing crisis. Look at COVID, with these material political conditions. Now all of a sudden you come to the political and material conditions, but they have a mystification due to ideology and their compulsion to repeat and enjoy because they don't have the tools of a theoretical knowledge or a background to demystify.
I just want to add something here, which is that to like just depict who the recipient of that kind of mystification would be. It's like you have what Zizek talks about, which is this, the subject supposed to believe. He takes the subject supposed to know, and he adds this category of the subject supposed to believe, and it's like, it's that subject supposed to believe that perpetuates belief. It's not the idea that I would take that belief on my own. And this is why Zizek's explanation is really illuminating here, because it's like there is a certain grammar of taking on belief that has nothing to do with direct belief of anything. And it's like what unites most of us is the inability to believe. So it's like Zizek even explains terrorism through that lens, which is like the terrorist living in an age of like dissolving perspectives would not be able to actually articulate what it means to believe something. So only like an extreme act could ever ultimately like be the enunciation of a certain belief.
Yeah.
So it's like
a Unabomber, like a Ted Kaczynski.
let's say, and let's say certain people overinvest in that.
Yeah.
For example, no one in particular, but it's like the subject supposed to believe. It's like most of us don't go to the extremes to reconcile ourselves with the substance of our beliefs, but what we do need is the subject supposed to believe, and it's a subject supposed to believe that is like it's kind of, I feel like it's a logic of pressurized time, like in the logical time essay. It's just like it's a structural reality. There is no one person, but we still do depict that person in our minds. We caricaturize
interpassivity that is going to play in the subject supposed to believe, where it's like
absolutely, because it relieves you of the task of having to believe directly. So even to say, like let's say the commenter in question that we have here, like this leap of faith, the leap of faith is that like the question isn't should I believe because it's true so much as like should I believe in the way that the modality, the exact structure of my enjoyment will be left intact, because that's what we really want. And I think most of us want that, like living a certain lifestyle is to keep that lifestyle like intact ultimately. And that like really does become, even when we don't want it to be, even when we want to be revolutionary and rebellious and fury bros or whatever, we still kind of want to keep a social symptom intact. And that's the thing that's so hard to disinvest from.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'd say is just like I just don't think that there's such a thing as a clear perception, a non-ideological clear perception. I see philosophy and theory as a sort of like self-brainwashing process as a way of like contradicting brainwashing. Like you're the only way out of brainwashing is brainwashing, right? You have to take on other perspectives in like a radical way, and so you have to pass through it. You have to live it out. You don't just I disagree with Marx, so I'm just gonna like do my whatever, do something else entirely. It's like, no, you live in a world though, and like most people who think about these things seriously have a position on or a relation to this thing, and it might be a willful ignorance and a hostility, but it's just like it's not something that can just be neutrally looked at. But also like if you just take it on where you're like it's more or less right, and we might as well just assume that it's more or less right, like it seems to show us everything. No, it's a useful like perspective, but it's not just a singular perspective. It's like a whole field of conversations. There are people today who exist who kind of are the representatives of this discourse, right? Mm-hmm. And they tell you what the correct take on it is or how to use it, and it's like I'm not looking for a set of like things that I should believe or whatever. I'm looking for a useful way of understanding, because theory really means understanding. It means conceptual understanding, right? It means systematic conceptual understanding, you know? So it's like, yeah, I think a lot of times philosophy and theory is kind of packaged and as a commodity, as an ideology, because it is being appropriated by people who have an ideology, and obviously, like, to some degree we all have our own ideologies. You just have to be like self-critical of it and remember that, like, you know, that a lot of the categories and concepts and assumptions and values and goals of an ideology can be treated as like hypotheses, and then you free yourself from the concepts a little bit to say, okay, but what's real? And you try to test that shit out. You don't just go, oh, this is what it is, this is the definitions of the things, this is what our position is, and we defend our position against other positions that are either stupid or evil or whatever. No. It's just like, I don't see that as helpful for doing what we need to do, which is a task that, I mean, someone has to take it on, which is like, we got to read it all. We got to do it all. We can't just like focus on one little area and be like, oh, we found our thing, and now we're going to cherry pick philosophy and theory just to bolster up our thing. The point is you take it on. Like, look, if I turn out to be an anti-Lacanian someday, how goofy of me to do that without first understanding what it is that I'm against. So we don't get, so in a sort of sense, I don't like when people use this person's relevant or this person's irrelevant as an argument, because it's hipster. It's consumeristic. It's not a good criterion to judge something by. But
yeah.
But also Lacan is relevant, and if you want to do philosophy or theory, you basically have to do Lacan. You have to do Žižek, and so if you want to do that, and then as a, you know, become a more autonomous and empowered individual from that position, critique the master or whatever. Cool. But, you know, fucking good luck. It's going to be hard. Good luck with that. It's going to be really fucking hard. But if you want help, we're trying to figure this shit out too, and so we're talking about it. And that's why we're talking about it. So it's not trying to sell you on it, but at the same time, we come across like we are trying to sell you on it when we say, oh, well, your thing in the world, your ideology, it's, you know, a fundamental intervention against your ideology is actually not understanding the stuff that we care about, which is impenetrable, and you'll just have to believe us. It's true. It's like, that's, I think that's annoying, and that's not what we're trying to do. But I also would see, I think it when I watch a lot of other people. So I expect other people in my audience to think that, to wonder that about me as well. And so it's something for us to all think about. And it's, like I said, a meta discourse that isn't had really. And it raises the fucking stakes, dude. It raises the fucking.
I want to say something though.
Go.
Apropos of like everything we're talking about tonight. How many people are watching right now?
Oh, I have no
Just
idea.
Ballpark.
500.
What do you think?
Damn.
No, it's
probably a few.
Okay,
right,
so live we have 5 people, but I mean it's like 3:34 a.m.
Yeah.
So we're mostly doing this for.
I just want to say to the 5 people that are watching us, and to anyone else who will be watching this recording in the future, Žižek is a brilliant thinker. He is a theoretician. His system is by no means complete or fully fleshed out, but it is about as close as one could get with that amount of knowledge and that amount of work and that amount of innate genius. But I will say one thing. His system is not amenable to Christian conservatives. I wanted to say that. I wanted to say this earlier tonight. I want to make a video about this.
Yeah.
Yes, he does talk about Christian atheism. He has a lot of very brilliant and idiosyncratic and difficult to grasp views on Christianity. but he is not a Christian conservative.
Yeah.
He is not a Christian conservative. He is not completing the system of Hegel for the end of, like this idea that you can transcend split subjectivity.
Yeah.
And none of what he does is amenable to that. Like, however much you might want to just like try to, gerrymander different parts of his philosophy to suit that, it's not going to happen. Zizek, I don't know that he would call himself a Marxist, but he is in a constant dialogue with Marxism, and it's for a reason. And there's a reason why in the book he came out with before Surplus Enjoyment, there's a chapter called Why I'm So Communist.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't say that just by chance. Like, that wasn't just to provoke people. He does like to provoke people, but he did not just say that just to provoke people.
Yeah.
I just think it needs to be broadcasted that Zizek is in constant dialogue with Marxism and Hegelianism. And as much as he talks about Lacan and the subject, and it is very important, and even if he talks about Christian atheism, his main project is not to restore any kind of like wholeness to the human condition or the human situation in a way that in any way agrees with any kind of Orthodox Christianity or Christianity as a doctrine or conservatism. I just want to put that out there because that message is being broadcasted and pushed by a certain group of people right now, and they're getting a lot of traction. And I think it's fucked up.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my little rant.
Yeah.
I will shut up.
Not only with Zizek, but even Chiesa takes it up with it's like there's this incomplete system to it, and so therefore the most radical thing is to be not only Christian atheists but agnostic atheists. But the one last thing I'll add, because I don't know if we're gonna cut it soon, but we've touched ideology, we touched the political, sociological aspect, we touched philosophy as we were ending it right here. My thing is focusing on Lacan as a clinician is the clinical analytic aspect in its relation to the social order, to society, to capitalism. DNG pointed this out, so did Foucault in The Birth of the Clinic, the function of, psychiatry, goddamn cats, my cats, psychiatry as instantiation of state discourse, the capitalist discourse, reorienting you, making you behave to socially acceptable norms. We see this today with ego psychology, and every fucking CBT simp therapist will be like, telling you as soon as you walk in what they believe is wrong with you. They've already put themselves as subjects supposed to know, and you are supposed to listen, because you feel that you are wrong, right? Or you are unhealthy. And then they prescribe you with whatever medication, whatever breathing techniques, and then they give you this self-help book that they believe helps them and helps all their clients, because they are in a position. And one thing too is because they don't realize that most people in whatever we want to call it working class operate on a day-to-day basis on the internet. They're interested in the theory. They're interested into all these different ideas, however curated they are by influencers. But the fact that there is this curiosity, like the person in my meme, but they are like in an aimless, path. And these PMC therapists want to kind of speak from the privilege of the position, a neutral ground that they believe is neutral from politics, from the social order, and that they're just doing their job, but really they are reorienting your ego to fit the capitalist discourse of lack, and think that there's this core self in you. Lacan says no. Lacan's critique in Seminar 1 and Seminar 2 are all about dismantling ego psychology, because they instantiate resistances and expand the amount of strength your ego can have to pretty much alienate itself from the unconscious. from the subject of discourse, the subject who should be put into question. This is Lacan's whole project, besides going back to Freud, but also to show that analysis is not a therapy in the sense that we think of the ego psychology. It's not a psychiatry. It doesn't diagnose you as soon as you walk in. You could be like, yeah, I went to like a CBT or DBT therapist, or I did some like person-centered psychology, and they said that I'm manic depressed, or like, I have anxiety disorder, or I'm borderline. And then you go to a psychoanalyst, and totally not the case. You just have so much like hystericization of yourself and the world around you, etc. But Lacan really much revolutionized the way we think about psychoanalysis today.
So what you're saying is that this whole conversation, we've touched on everything but except for the clinical aspect, which is the main reason you're here for it, and that note taken, and I'm glad you said it.
In capitalism, that it functions as ideology as far as therapy culture goes, and that's why Lacan is important in that aspect. Because I remember I listed out the philosophical, social, and political, but there's also the clinical, and the clinical should be oriented to just put capitalism
into question. Yeah, well, I mean, I know that one of the things that you will hear people at Sublation Media say, or at Platypus say, is that psychoanalysis is a mere social phenomenon. It's like it's merely like a symptom of capitalism. They'll also say it's like used as a way of perpetuating a capitalism, of obfuscating capitalism, of adapting people to capitalism. But that is for sure one of the ways that Lacan is an intervention on the stage of world history, and that yes, he challenges therapy culture and ego psychology, and he challenges all of this stuff in a way that's pretty crazy. Now, it's important to say Lacan doesn't have like a worldview. Like there's not like the Lacanian worldview. There's only concepts that he developed trying to understand things in the clinic, and also his conveyance of these things always presuppose or are directed towards an audience of people who are primarily becoming clinicians, and he's trying to get them to get like the point that they aren't the master of the patients. That a terrible problem with therapy culture and ego psychology, and like which is almost everything counseling and therapy related today. Well, I mean, I guess it depends. Sometimes it can be a little bit more stripped down, like you said, with like, is it CBT? Am I saying it right?
Yeah, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, all behavior-based to exercise your behavior to fit in socially acceptable situations.
Right, and so okay, where the fuck am I going with this? What am I trying to say here? I'm getting tired now. I want to say that if we want to challenge the main assumptions that we have internalized and that our society has internalized, and that the way that power has organized all of these institutions and these practices, you want to go with someone who radically did it, like his whole fucking life. And so it's not just a bunch of concepts that just exist in a system that could be written out in a textbook. It's coming from this therapeutic experience and trying to convey this teaching to people in a certain way. How that gets applied to philosophy is like another thing altogether. And so, or to politics or whatever, the various people plunder it for their own whatever it is that they want to do. You want to be a clinician, and you don't want to be perpetuating cringe and harm by doing this thing. So it's like, if you want to understand the phallus or objet a or the Borremian knot, the different registers, if you want to just understand these things at like a level that will at least help you be able to like read Žižek or listen to him talk, or other theorists who are talking about things today, the point is to see the world through these concepts. It's not to believe that this is the case necessarily, this is reality. I mean, maybe you can be convinced that there are like some fundamental truths here. We're really just describing reality. But, also, we're seeing the world this way. And I don't like when people make it too relativistic. Oh, we just apply these sociological lenses. We use our sociological imagination. We just think through feminism, racism, classism. We think through various forms of oppression. We just apply these lenses to thinking about things sociologically and critically. Like, we're not just talking about that. We're talking about going to another level altogether. Because we're not just applying these lenses willy-nilly and seeing what looks good or sounds good. I think we're holding I do believe that we are holding ourselves to a higher standard. And that is the goal. Is to, listen, I mean, if you're going to be a therapist today, and I know a lot of people who are. That's a lot of the people who watch this shit are people who are going into practice. And so, Lacan is just an important part of all of this, because otherwise someone like, PJ, or I'm trying to think, Carl Rogers, or, there's all these different, people who just, they sound smart, they sound like they're giving you some good ideas, but because it works with your common sense and your fundamental assumptions already internalized so much, you don't even realize what's there. And so it's just like people who are not just coming to Lacan for enjoyment, but are also like, it's an important part of the exam in life and applying it to everything. Part of it is just like a radical, it's not just, it's like, think about Descartes' radical skepticism and how useful that is for stripping yourself away from, tradition. Well, this is a more radical form of that. It's a form of that comes with a set of concepts and categories that, if you can get a handle on them and talk about each one in 20 different ways without relying on other jargon and just applying it to situations in your life or the lives of others, or anecdotes or whatever, just like figure out how to use it, how to see the world through it. And then keep going and keep learning other stuff, because it's like there's other kinds of theory that you also need. So it's not a one-stop shop, and it's not the only thing in the world. And, it poses a radical intervention against other things, but I think other things pose a problem for it as well. So, it's our jobs as just humans, not representatives of a specific tradition, to kind of be working through that, or committed to working through that in the long term. Maybe not in the short term, maybe we've got better things to do immediately, but in the longer term, that is the goal.
Yeah.
So, fucking cheers.
Yes.
It's been nice having coffee all night with you.
Oh, yeah. I have not had any coffee at all. Just literally just pure will and endurance.
Well, coffee does.
The last thing I want to say, I just want to put this out there based on everything you're saying.
Yeah.
If you want to learn to think and engage in the challenge of thinking for the rest of your life, read Lacan.
Yeah.
Read Lacan.
Yeah.
Fucking do it.
He will teach you to think.
With your feet.
With your feet. And also, I want to say something about my compatriot here, Andrew Flores, is that not only is he training to be a clinician, to be an analyst, but he is also trying to, keep within his view all of the political implications and realities of what he's doing and what people are dealing with. And I don't think it would be false to call you a Marxist, Andrew, right? I think that's a signifier you welcome.
Yeah, for the most part.
And I think that what he's doing is, and when I say impossible, I don't mean this by any means as an insult. I mean it like as a compliment. Like it is an impossible task that he is pulling off very elegantly.
It's hard.
I'm pretty stoked
in
about
remaining cognizant of the political situation that people are dealing with, but also trying to address their situations in their singularity. And I think that's very, very admirable.
Yeah, Andrew, you are admirable. And I was pretty stoked to hear some of the stuff that you're working on in our conversation before we started recording, before we started streaming. But yeah, it's cool that you lost your theory plea virginity on here, Nick. And welcome to the channel. It was good to have you on. We've been talking behind the scenes for a few months, so it was good. This was great. I really appreciate it, guys. Like, I actually really needed it. I've been wanting it. I hope that I can get together with you both soon in the near future, and we can actually do something in real life. I have an idea, but I can't talk about it while we're in the public. I want to talk. I want to
be amongst us.
Yeah. All right. Anyone have anything to say before I close this out?
Wu-Tang. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you to the. How do you guys say it? Que Vuoi boys.
Que Vuoi, yeah.
The boys, yeah. Those Zekis. Check out our channel. The Thai $sign over here. Yeah. I'm Little Nosy Vert. Our channel is dedicated to. We're working through the working through of Lacan together, but we're gonna do some other shit too. That we're gonna branch out. We got an extra special guest coming on the channel tomorrow.
The myth, the man, the legend are one of our favorite people in the world. Yeah.
Also, I'm my blog. I'm getting my blog very soon.
You getting your blog up?
I've got a blog coming out. It's called Free Beer Tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's coming out. I've got intro video. I'm a boomer. I don't know how Instagram works, but Andrew is like walking me through it, and he's gonna help me be a memeified, wonderful theory man.
Yeah.
Wonderful theory man.
Yeah. And I got ideas, and Nick mentioned the essay too. So like, when he mentioned it with believing, like it kind of helped bring some ideas together. But I'm working on like formulating my new article on logical time and the mirror stage, and we have the two notions of anticipation, and how Lacan already had the symbolic like worked out.
That's dope. That's dope. And I'm putting together basically like we're going to approach Michael Heinrich's introduction to the 3 volumes of Marx's Capital with at least, at the bare minimum, a lecture, a panel, and a podcast panel, a live podcast panel probably, and like a group discussion, which the panel will be kind of like the beginning of the group discussion, and then other people will come on and be able to ask questions and shit like that. And so I recommend everybody immediately pick up that book, read it, listen to it, whatever you got to do. If it's not on Audible, use some, software, maybe natural readers. I pay for it. Otherwise, you only get 20 minutes a day or whatever, but it's worth it because it's like, yeah, you can play a book that way and you get the PDF, and then listen to it. There's other ways to listen to books, obviously, but Michael Heinrich's introduction to the 3 volumes of Marx's Capital is, even if you don't agree with him on everything, it is a good introduction. And I agree with him in some important ways. And so I'm looking forward to giving a lecture on it. And it's going to be like a mini conference. Really, think about it. Like it's a lecture, a panel, and a discussion. And so some of that's like there's why I care about it, and then there's why other people care about it. And so we're going to approach it that way. If you're one of the people in my orbit who I already do stuff with, or if it's already something we might do, then let's talk about it because it'll be coming up really soon. So get moving on the book and stay tuned. Even if you're just an audience member on this channel, you will be seeing some of that in the near future. And I don't know if it'll all be live and public, but some of it will be, and it's going to be dope. So stay tuned.
Yeah. For sure.
All right, everybody, have a good. Hey, what time is it where you're at, everybody?
It's about to be 6 over here.
So, yeah.
For both of you, it's 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Socrates would just talk all night and everyone would fall asleep while he talked until it was just him. And then he would like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I guess I'll walk around. And by the way, it's not the coffee that's keeping me up. I work a night shift. I'm just coming off my night shift. And so this is normal for me. So
yeah,
I could,
remembered. I was like, oh, yeah.
This is good.
I could-
It's like amped up. Yeah.
it's like what?
I'm ready to keep going.
Oh, I know. Actually, it's probably going to take a while to wind down. But everybody, we better go start winding down. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a good one. See